The topic of this video was chosen by our Patreon backers. To get involved and support the growth of this channel, visit patreon.com/TLDR news. The backstop is a term you might have heard people use constantly when referring to Brexit at the moment. The backstop relates to what is potentially the biggest issue in the Brexit negotiations so far, the Northern Irish border. This 310-mile border has been completely open for 20 years since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement brought peace to the border. Currently, there are no hard border crossing points between Northern Ireland and Ireland, with people able to pass freely between countries at the estimated 275 crossing points. The problem is that this might not be able to continue after Brexit. Forgive me if this seems obvious, but the EU needs strong external borders. The bloc works by setting rules and tariffs for goods and people entering it. Therefore, the external borders to the Union need to be hard, so all people and goods coming into it can be checked and monitored to ensure that they're following the EU's laws. Without a strong border, anyone or anything could sneak into the EU unchecked and would effectively invalidate the EU's tariffs, quotas and laws. Similarly, if the UK wants to set its own immigration rules and create its own trade deals, it will need hard borders to prevent goods and people from getting in unchecked. You're probably one step ahead of me here, but having an open border between the EU and UK doesn't work well if both need to have hard borders to protect their policies and economic structures. Currently, both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland are in the EU, meaning that they follow the same rules and are part of the same bloc. That means that there's no hard border needed in the same way that there's no hard border between France and Germany. However, if no deal was reached between the UK and EU, that would all change. Suddenly, if there was no deal in place, then a hard border would be required between Ireland and Northern Ireland. That's not the EU being difficult or the UK media trying to use scare tactics. That's how international economic relationships work. You have to protect your borders. The fear is that if we put back a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, it could reignite tensions in the area. That's obviously something that no one wants to see happen, so that's where the backstop comes in. The backstop, as the name suggests, is a backup plan. It's not plan A, or plan B, or C, or even D, but it's designed to keep peace between Northern Ireland and Ireland, in case a deal isn't reached. Think of the backstop as a safety net. The backstop isn't supposed to be a permanent solution, instead it's just a temporary move to keep peace and stability in the area until a full deal is reached. The EU and UK did originally agree to the concept of a backstop back in December 2017. The problem is that the two sides can't agree on the terms of the backstop yet, and as such it's hard to say what the backstop will actually end up looking like. The EU has suggested a backstop agreement which would leave Northern Ireland in the EU's customs union, parts of the single market, and within the EU's VAT system. That is, until a final deal is reached. This would mean that until a complete deal is reached between the UK and EU, Northern Ireland would remain close to the EU, and as such there'd be no need for a hard border. As I mentioned earlier, there needs to be a hard border between the EU and UK to protect EU and UK laws. So if Northern Ireland sticks with the EU's economic policies, there's no reason to have a hard land border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the EU, as they're following the same laws. Therefore, we'd no longer need to worry about this border at all. However, it would only be Northern Ireland staying close to the EU, essentially shifting the border into the Irish Sea. The concern that many Brits have is this would potentially damage the overall union and be a step towards Northern Ireland leaving the UK altogether. This led to Theresa May rejecting the EU's backstop plan. She said that she'd prefer to see the entirety of the UK continue to be aligned with the EU for a limited time after Brexit, rather than see Northern Ireland left alone. The EU aren't fond of this idea, and neither is the Irish Prime Minister. The principle of a backstop is that it's an arrangement of indefinite length. According to the EU, the backstop is supposed to be a way of preventing a hard border until a better solution or deal is reached. The key word there is until. This means that the EU isn't going to be happy with Theresa May's proposed ongoing alignment until 2020 or 2022. The backstop needs to continue to be in place for as long as it takes for a better deal to be reached. Ensuring that the backstop continues to be in place until that point is vital to keep the EU and Irish governments on side. The problem for May is that a backstop like this would likely be a hard sell in the UK. As I said earlier, splitting Northern Ireland away from the rest of the UK and having it follow many of the rules and regulations of the EU Single Market and Customs Union is a slippery slope to some, and they believe it will lead to Northern Ireland leaving the UK and at very least damaging the UK's sovereignty. Considering the strongly held feelings of many Brexiteers, it shouldn't be surprising that there's a lot of Brits who aren't willing to see May capitulate to the EU and give up Northern Ireland. In fact, it goes beyond just the optics of letting Northern Ireland stay with the EU. It's also not currently legal. The Customs Bill doesn't give May much flexibility in this area, as one of the amendments explicitly prevents Northern Ireland from staying in the customs union. So the two sides have hit an impasse. The issue of the backstop is being blamed for holding up the negotiations process. The EU aren't willing to discuss a future deal until issues such as the backstop are handled, and the UK aren't willing to accept the EU terms of the backstop. Both sides recognise the need for a legal backstop, just not what it should look like. Some members of the UK government want to see a whole UK backstop, leaving the entirety of the UK and the EU until a deal is reached. But that's unacceptable to Brexit supporting MPs and citizens. The EU wants to keep Northern Ireland within its economic area until a deal is drawn, but splitting Northern Ireland away from the rest of the UK is unacceptable to the UK government, especially to the DUP. The UK government wants it to be time limited, with the entirety of the UK staying aligned with the EU a little longer, a proposal which is unacceptable to the EU, as it's just pushing the problem down the road. I'm sure you picked up this vibe already, but securing a backstop isn't going to be easy. This video is an extract from our full video, The Current State of Brexit Negotiations, a video that will be released later this week. As we said earlier, our patrons chose this topic, so if you want to support the channel and have your say, sign up to be a Patreon backer at patreon.com/TLDR News. Make sure to subscribe to TLDR News to be kept up to date and informed when the full video comes out.